is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Cedric retired from the Ford Motor Company assembly line after 35 years and decided it was time to share some of his stories from the streets of Detroit as a young man. The name of his book is Detroit, When Darkness Comes Screaming, and screaming it did.
We used to, in Detroit, we call them street stories. There is one, and it's about a friend that I liked. She's one of those characters of the streets where she was abused coming up. And on the old stroll of Detroit, the old stroll around Brush Street, John R., the old pimp stroll, they called them gangster bitches. She was like robbing niggas. But it all comes from her childhood where she was abused. She was taking men off. Other girls with like Peaches and other girls in the street were working the street. Some girls were working the clubs. But Miss Honey, she was taking people out. Not out, but she was taking them off. You know, they think they're going to get something, but she ended up robbing them. She worked the centers, she worked the hotels. She was very beautiful, very smart, but very dangerous. But anyhow, I liked her. I called the story Snake Eyes. And I'm watching them because I'm doing my boy a favor because he just got 3 to 5. So I'm doing him a favor, watch his little sister Nene, who was a dancer. There was a freak in the street, and girls were getting cut up then. And that's where all of us, all the Stonewall, all of us in this story here, played a part in this story here. And to me, it just touched me because one of the girls had to go back to Chicago because she got her face cut up. But I just appreciated their game because these girls are very brave. They still get up every day and get out into the street. They still dance. They still hustle the streets. And I used to think, these girls really got some nerve, got some heart to get right back out here. And there's a freak out here cut these girls up and his girls out. These girls get up and get right back, get all dolled up and get right back out into them streets. But Miss Honey, I liked her. I wrote a story about Miss Honey. I wrote a poem about her. I called her Yesterday's Child because she was, whatever happened to her yesterday made her who she was. She didn't have, I remember a guy was following her in the driving center. She would go into the downtown driving parking and she might have a trick with her and this guy was bird dogging her and Honey turned right around and popped him. But she was capable of that. So it's just...
So these are the kinds of stories that we find in your first book, even though this story is in your second book. It's the same kind of stories.
Yeah. In the first book, there's a story where everybody is like selling, the family, they're selling this product. They're in this dope house selling this product, right? All right. Some of them sold weed. Some of them sold heroin. Okay. Some of them sold crack. There was this guy going through the hood. We called him the Sandman because these joints were getting knocked off. Everybody was getting put to sleep inside this joint. At the time, we called it like coffin pin executing, where we walk in and the whole house is put to sleep. Everybody in there is asleep. Everybody in there is dead. But anyhow, a couple of Big Daddy's joints got knocked over. I like that story because the Sandman got caught up this time. But it was all because all the boys worked together. All the boys worked together, set up house and everything. You know what I mean? Like everything was everything, like business was on, but they were just sitting there waiting for her. And we found out why our people was getting knocked off because it's the first time it happened. It happened since then, but people would knock on the door, police, police, police. You would think it's a raid. And Hop and Benny and them opened the door for them because they thought it was the police. That happened a few times before people got on to that. So there's some pretty nice, I think they're nice, because these people got hurt. I tell these people's story because they're good peoples. You know, they just got caught up in something, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So these are the type of stories, street stories that I write.
Great stories and great characters, Cedric. Thank you. Therese Broderick was a librarian for most of her life, and about 18 years ago, she went to grad school and started taking writing seriously. She's been writing chat books, and now she's published her first book. It's entitled Breath Debt.
The first word, B-R-E-A-T-H, as in breathing, breath, and the second word, debt, D-E-B-T, and that title is my signpost for people. It's my way of giving people an entrance into the book. Many of the poems are about my father's illness, his lung diseases, his inability to breathe. And so breath debt refers to his lack of oxygen, his medical condition. But there are many other poems which are about the breathtakingly beautiful experiences I've had in life, some of the places that I've seen around the world, in a different continent or in my own backyard. And so there's a sense of holding my breath out of wonder. And then finally, debt refers to my sense of indebtedness, my gratitude to all the other poets who have been breathing their words and their voices into my own work.
Oh my God, Therese, that's beautiful. Do you read your stuff? Do you go to like open mic nights or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, reading aloud your own poetry is really, really important. It's essential for me. And so when I joined the local writing community 18 years ago, that was one of the main benefits of being in a community, is that they sponsored lots of different open mic reading programs, library talks, and festivals. And so I have participated in a lot of those, read my work in front of an audience and get some feedback and learn about the art and the practice of oral performance.
Do you find that's a good vehicle to sell your books?
Yes, to sell books? Oh, yes. Over the years, when I published little chapbooks, I would definitely sell those at the open mics. Not every time I went to an open mic. If I was what they call a featured reader, if I were, so to speak, the star performer that night, then I would bring my books to sell for sure. And I've already sold lots of copies of my new book with Page Publishing that way, because in the last few months, I've made several appearances in libraries and bookstores, even a B&B, a bed and breakfast, and I've sold my books.
You got this thing down. So you're this is what you do now. And
Absolutely.
surely are an inspiration, because I think the biggest problem is impressing upon people, no matter what Page does for you, you got to do stuff on your own. And especially poets.
Oh, yes. For the past 5 or so years, I've been a member of a weekly critique group. The 4 or 5 of us meet every single week, and we go over each other's poetry. So every single week, I have to write a new poem to bring to that group, and that's just a wonderful motivation for me to keep writing and keep producing. Really encourage any writer who wants to continue, who wants to persist, to find some kind of group like that. It's a source of support and a source of feedback, and the other members of the group bring opportunities to me to go read my poetry at festivals or in classrooms. So it's really important to join a community.
All right, some great advice for all of our authors. Therese, thank you. Our next author blew me away, and you'll see why at the end of the interview. Rachel Hirschfeld hates writing, and she knows writing is rewriting, but she's a lawyer, she loves animals, and felt compelled to help people protect their animals in state documents in the event something happens. So this is not something you want to leave to chance, right?
Because if something happens to a pet owner, whether they're partly unable to care, like maybe they went to the hospital for a few days, or maybe they were stuck in a foreign land, or something like that, someone had to be there to continue taking care of them. They're not like a car that, a few months later you could come and put gas in. Animals need immediate care. And so I wanted to make sure that there were documents, whether you were dead or alive, whether you were 6 feet under or you were just unable for a period. The animals had to keep on being cared for, and those are the documents. That's why I wrote the Scholastic book, so lawyers could understand the laws that I created and that were already there. And that's why I wrote Law and Order for your everyday person.
What did you write about?
Laws pertaining to ongoing care, what you put in the will so that it would overcome the problem of probate. Every will gets probated and gets held up in court, every will. The will is only for when you're dead, but what if you're not? So I created something called the Pet Protection Agreement, Pet Trust. It stands alone. It's valid during life and after death. It's valid in all 50 states, so that can't mess things up. It's valid all over the world. So if you're traveling, I was just in France with my dog Swizzle, and what happens if something happened to me? My document had to be valid there too, and it is. It's like Protecting Pets Ongoing Care 101. It's a guidebook. Pets are property. Right. So if your will is being held up, your pets are going to a shelter. The court will put them in a shelter because they're considered abandoned because they are not cared for. You didn't write a document for them. So they get put into a shelter while the court determines. And the fight goes on. For the probate of your house, let's say, your pets will also be in the probate situation if you have pets.
What a mess.
Yes, and that's why I wrote the Pet Protection Agreement. It never goes to court. It stands outside the court. The court is not allowed to take it in and deal with it, ever. So while your house and everything else is in turmoil, while the kids are fighting and your sister's fighting and, other cousins you never even remembered are fighting, your pets will be cared for if you have a pet protection agreement. They're not part of the probate. They're not part of the will. They're not part of anything. The pet protection agreement stands alone, free, and never goes to court, ever. The book comes with a pet protection agreement.
Excellent.
That's how serious I am about people reading this document.
So I buy the book, I learn about the document, and then I have the document in my hand to fill out, and then my pet is protected.
That's right. And let's say you've got a dog today, and in 20 years your dog passes and you've got a cat.
Right.
Any animal that you have at the time that you cannot take care of it is included, whether you mention them or not.
How is that possible?
Well, I wrote the laws. It's possible. I mean, I've sold tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of these over the past 15 years.
And this was all inspired by Soup Bone.
Everything is because of Soup Bone. Soup Bone is my dog who passed 15 years ago, and he changed my life. He's in my inspiration. He was the epitome of love, and he has to be protected.
So what's your next book?
Well, I'm passing in the next few days.
You're what?
I'm going to be dead. I'm going to be dead in a few days. I'm taking myself off of life-saving medication, and I'm going to die. That's why they had to squeeze this in today.
What do you mean you're going to die? What do you have?
This isn't about that, but, I'm not going to be writing another book.
Rachel, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank God I have this choice.
We're going to take a quick break. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books. And unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them. And they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Dale Joyner is a reading tutor, and she'll do just about anything to inspire kids and adults, for that matter, to read. She was inspired to write her first book by her granddaughter. It's entitled Yvette Likes School, so got to be a reason for that.
Well, actually, her family values, her parents' family values the things that they did together. They always had family time. They had limited TV time, even though they were watching TV in the book. And she was a talented and gifted student, my granddaughter. So the things that she experienced and things that she saw in school, and I wanted to use some of those things to help her to learn. And my granddaughter was very inquisitive, and so I wanted Yvette to be inquisitive too. So she was inquisitive, and she was always thinking. So that was the second part. The second motivation for the second part was my granddaughter. She was curious, and the words that she used, and she was always asking questions.
So I guess your granddaughter's a pretty special girl.
Oh, yes, she is, but she's an adult now. So, and she's successful, and she's in college and doing well for herself.
And did you feel the need to write this book?
Yes, I wanted to write something interesting that kids could relate to, or I wanted to motivate them to be curious and wanted to motivate them to learn. Yes, I plan to write more books more books that are interesting and more books that kids can relate to.
What made you start writing these books?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. Originally, I wanted to write a family history book. I'm still planning to do that, but because I am with kids, I work with kids, and I see some of the things that they are going through, and with the demographics that I work with, I wanted to write something that would probably motivate them, interest them, and help them to read.
What do you do?
I am a PALS tutor, but I like to call myself a reading interventionist.
How old are the kids that you work with?
Well, we work with from pre-K to grade 3.
Do a lot of these kids have the kind of family time and support that the little girl in your book has?
No, they don't.
And you think
They
that makes a difference in how well you do in school?
Yes, they could, maybe someone could see the book and see and relate to themselves in some way, or see what they can do, and to help them to think, because many kids, sometimes the ones that I work with, they don't really think about things.
Yeah.
So maybe if they read the books, they'll start thinking about what they could do. But for example, I walk with a wobble, and yesterday one person asked me, why do I walk like that? But all the time, this whole time I had been working there, no one ever asked me. They were not curious enough to ask me why I was walking like that. But they would always model me, mock me. So I would say, so I finally said, oh, you're the first one to ask me why I walk like this.
That must have been like an awakening for those kids.
Right, but they weren't curious enough to ask. They need to ask questions and to find out why and how things, work and why, but they don't do that.
Right, so you're hoping this book will maybe get them on the path.
Right.
All right, our next author was also inspired by a family member. Randy Eubanks writes about his dad in his book entitled My Dad, but that's not the whole title, right, Randy?
My Dad, the smartest 7th grader on earth. Yeah, that's the whole title.
Why do you call him the smartest 7th grader? He only went to the 7th grade?
Correct. The reason I call him the smartest 7th grader on earth is because he's got 5 patents.
5 patents for what?
Different types of inventions. He's got an invention on a garden plow that you put behind a riding lawnmower that you plow your garden with. It's pretty cool. He's also got an invention on a tool holder that you put different tools in. When I was in the remodeling and painting business, you put a paintbrush, you put a scraper in it, you secure it in place by screwing it tight around some cables and a wedge, a type of leverage type of deal there. And then he's got patents on a nutcracker. He's got a patent on a tobacco harvester clip. And he's got a unique, literally, it looks like a wheelchair. It's attached by cables to the top of a ladder and drops down around the 2 big wheels, and you roll yourself up the side of the building, sit down and work at the same time. It's pretty cool.
You roll yourself up to the side of the building, but you can sit down while you're working.
Exactly. And of course, his flagship invention was the Easy Mower. And we were on the American Inventor Show back in 2007 in Tampa, Florida. We live in Eastern North Carolina. And what happened was we were one of 500 participants. trying to compete for the prize of $1 million for the greatest American inventor. We got a chance to appear before judges. It was really cool. And the book is about my dad, about never giving up on hope. He's an overcomer. His favorite saying was next. He kept persevering. He kept inventing. He was just quite a man.
How did you make out at this show?
Well, I really rather not reveal all of that because that's in the book. I really rather not say what the bottom line was. We did well, but you have to read the book to find out the story because it's just a great story.
Is your dad still with us?
No, ma'am. Unfortunately, he passed away May the 1st. The book was published around Father's Day. He knew what I was doing. Actually, what happened when we come back from Tampa, Florida back in 2007, I hand wrote 50 pages of notes because I want to capture a time in history when an adult son and his father could take an adventure together in order to read to my grandchildren, his great-grandchildren later on, about our trip. And I put the notes away when we come back. My dad was 80 years old at the time, still looked good, great shape. He retired from work. He shouldn't retire. It was a big mistake for him. About 6 years later, I noticed his health started slipping. He lost his desire to invent, to create. So I went back, and I took them 50 pages of notes, and I've been a Toastmaster for years. I've given a lot of speeches on his different inventions. And I took the PDF files of all the speeches I gave, and I combined them together with the 50 pages of notes that I took. And the next thing you know, Alice, I had chapters and I had a book.
Yeah.
And I was able to read him half of the manuscript before he passed away in the hospital. He knew what I was doing. He was excited. He was telling the nurses. He was telling the doctors, my son's wrote a book about me. You got to check this thing out. But originally, I wrote the book to encourage him. However, once he's passed now, the book now is for a legacy. So his legacy can live on. And my dad taught me a lot of values I teach in the book. He was a World War II veteran, a farmer, an entrepreneur. And I bring out these values and teachings in the book. There's a lot of humor in it. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. It's a real easy read. And it's just a great motivational book. And I'm really having a great time with it.
Do we know your father's name? Do people know your dad?
Fernie Eubanks, Ferney Eubanks.
All right. Everybody look that up. Thanks, Randy. You're a good son. Finally, Jerry Carlos was at the lowest point in his life when he was inspired to write his first book entitled Out of the Ashes. He was working in a paper mill for more than 2 decades when his life was turned upside down. Jerry.
Well, what happened, it's a long process. Basically, what I once was a youth pastor, had a great job as a supervisor, superintendent, and then I lost my job at 20 years, like 2 days notice. I quit as a youth pastor, went farther looking for a job, and I stopped serving God. And slowly over 4 years, I'd give up one thing after the other. And I found myself in a dark place, and I lost my house, lost my property, I lost my family and everything, and that's where I went back to God for restoration, and that's what the story is about restoration. It's about a prison inmate that was once close to God, and Michael the Archangel. Satan knows that in the end times that Michael is a key player for his demise. So he knows that he cannot get Michael to turn against God, but if he can show how rotten the human race is, he knows his reign on earth will be forever. So what God does, he puts Michael in the body of Chuck to experience, Chuck is far away from God, to experience his hate, his emotions, but also to learn, as Chuck learns to love again, Michael learns to love. And Out of the Ashes is actually written about God has a place where he tells Michael about the human heart, and he compares it to a forest fire full of diseased trees and underbrush and stuff that clogs out all the good stuff, and that's what happens with the heart. And sometimes what you need is an uncontrollable fire that just burns everything out. But then God in the ashes plants a seed, and that's new life. And Michael learns to love mankind as God does through the eyes of Chuck. who, as Chuck grows and he gets restored and he becomes more of a man than he was before, Michael becomes more of an angel.
So did you actually wind up in prison?
Yeah, I was worshiping. Basically, I replaced God with money. This is just the first of many books. I have about 8 books I'm writing. My current girlfriend, she was homeless for a couple of years. She had the same way where she was well-to-do. She lost everything. God brought her back. We're going to co-write a book about the homeless and their stories. What we want to do is start nonprofits to use these books to help people. And my prayers on the story that I wrote there will inspire someone to make a change. Our pastor's I'm going to do a book party. I'm going to speak about it, and we'll probably go to other churches and speak about the book. Now, what God provides me money is to help others. Even though I was making less, I've been able to feed the hungry, and I do something, and God always provides more money. I found in the same way with my current girlfriend. She's actually going to be starting a nonprofit to help the homeless. She wants to buy a piece of property and have a homeless center and with training and daycare. And so we're both, equal walking, towards God and serving Him.
Whatever it takes, Jerry, you got to do whatever it takes to get yourself on the right track. Thanks so much. And that's a wrap for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini, and you're probably a frustrated writer, right? Stop being frustrated. Just write. Some great examples here. A grandmother writes about her granddaughter. A son writes about his inventor dad. A lawyer writes her last book about making sure your pets are taken care of in the event something happens to you. That interview is going to stay with me for a very long time. Everybody's got a story. Remember that, including you. If you missed anything on this show, or you just, you're in the mood to binge listen to the Page Publishing Book Club, just download our podcast at 710WOR.com. See you next time, and in the meantime, write on.